If you can race in the Coliseum and prove out that you can build a quarter-mile racetrack inside of the stadium, then that opens the door to all of the football stadiums around the world. And if you can run on the streets, then that gives you the ability to literally run anywhere that has the street on it.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're on the ball. California's Kevin Harvick does it. Straight naked right there. You're the man.
Welcome to Kevin Harvick's Happy Hour, presented by NASCAR on Fox. And we have a great guest today with NASCAR executive Ben Kennedy coming into the studio to talk about the schedule, to talk about Mexico City and everything that they have put together for 2025. And I want to learn a little bit about who he is, because he has a great background in this sport. So here's our conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Well, we're excited to have Ben Kennedy in studio. We appreciate you taking the time today to come talk about everything that has just been released with the schedule last week. I know from my side of it, when I look at the schedule and it's different, and you see those new and exciting places like Mexico City, and you see the playoffs mixed up. Tell us about how you arrive at all these things. But I think for the first thing is just talk about Mexico and everything that came out with this schedule.
Yeah, Kevin. So, a new and bold schedule for us. This is, I think, the 5th schedule in a row where we've had new venues that we've added to it. And, to your point, the big one is Autódromo Hermanos Rodriguez and taking our Cup Series down to Mexico City. And, this is something we've talked about for a while, right? That we want to take our Cup Series, our most premier products, and take it internationally. And we had a number of different conversations. Ultimately, Mexico City came to the forefront. Have a great relationship with the promoters down there. We've had the Xfinity Series race there back in 05 to 08. And just being in a market like Mexico City with over 20 million people in it is a huge opportunity to get our sport in front of a ton of new fans and new people. So we're excited about it. We know that this is only the start of our journey. We have, I said 10 months this morning on a call. It's now about 9.5 months until the event. So we have a lot of work to do for the next 9.5 months, but huge opportunity. I think we have great partners down there with Ocesa and the entire team, and just excited to see it on the schedule finally.
Yeah, when you look at that type of event, I was a part of those events that we did back in 05 and 06, and with the ones that I did. And when I got there, we were immediately met with security and went to the hotel, and everything was very structured. What is that process like for you to set it all out for the teams, or is that a continuation of everything that happens over the next 9.5 months?
Yes and yes. It's all of the above. So we've already done a handful of planning so far just to exactly that. And we're going to have a lot over the next 9.5 months. And, that's everything from making sure our haulers can get from Michigan. If they're going to stop in Charlotte, they can get to Charlotte and then make their way down to Mexico City. If you think about it, I mean, it's a pretty far drive to Mexico City. I mean, it's a drive to Laredo, Texas, or, just south of that to the border. And then it's about double that to get to Mexico City. So just thinking about the timing of that, and then, of course, any contingency plans you might have around Michigan, God forbid we have another rain delay and you end up on Monday, to make sure that everyone can get down there in time for practice. And ideally, we start to have cars on track by Friday. So, the almost 200 haulers that we have for our industry from Michigan all the way down to Mexico City and back is going to be part of our planning. Obviously, you have all of the people that are flying, whether it's over commercial or chartered aircrafts. You have all the on-ground transportation. You have hotel blocks. So all of that we want to make sure is buttoned up as well as we can. And we've already started a lot of that planning. Naturally, it's a little bit tough to plan when something hasn't really been announced yet. And now that it's been announced, I think it just accelerates a lot of that too. So we're putting together a team internally that is, we're going to have people that are going to be dedicated solely to this, is just transportation, logistics, and all of the on-ground kind of movement that's going to happen in and around that event. I mean, you lived it. It's quite, kind of a process that we put together. And, with our industry, it's a massive industry. It's thousands of people that are going to go down there. We're going to make sure that everything's buttoned up.
When you look at internationally, I think that the Mexico City events were great to be a part of. And I had other than the Montezuma's Revenge, I had a great, great time running both of those races, and I look back at those as being great events. But when I look at taking the Cup Series to Mexico City, that's a huge step. The international piece of it for us, from the team side of things, when we own the race teams, always opened up new budgets for our sponsors. We had, I think it was Palan Pelerico instead of Reese's on the car when we went to Mexico City when we were part of the Hershey brands. How important is that for not only to grow the sport, but for the teams to have another bucket of money to come out of? And is it important to get to Canada and that area as we go forward to open up those new buckets?
Yeah, for sure. And as we think about it, we think about NASCAR as a company, we think about our broadcast partners, we think about our teams, we think about our drivers and all the different stakeholders in the industry. That was a big part of our conversations, right? As you take our racing to new markets and different places or different types of venues, it naturally should open the door to new opportunities. And a lot of those are partnership opportunities. So I think the good news is ever since last Tuesday, we've already had a number of people reach out to us, and hopefully on the team side, they've had some phone calls as well of some potential, new interests that they may not have otherwise had. Should we be racing that event in the States as an example? So I think that opens up a new door for sure. And then, as we think about other markets internationally, we've talked about Canada a lot. I think, that could potentially be an opportunity in the future. I've talked about abroad. I think the biggest challenge that we have, as soon as you start to go abroad, especially when you start to talk about going over water, is naturally we just have so much inventory in our schedule, right? It's 38 races. And if you look at next year's schedule, we'll do the Clash, one weekend off, which a lot of people don't call it an off week. We go Daytona 500. We have one off week after that in April for Easter. And then we go straight through to the first week in November. And kind of keeping those two, bookends at either side of the schedule, it makes it more challenging logistically to go from, just make it up, let's say a Kansas to Brazil or Europe or wherever it might be. That's obviously in the back of our mind. I think it could be an opportunity as we think about, the next few years and potentially do take an exhibition race to, one of those further markets. But we've always said, hey, it's a huge opportunity to take more of these domestic races international. But at the same time, our core product is always going to be our U.S. markets too.
When you look at going and doing, well, let's just take the special event races, the All-Star race and the Clash. Do you ever see a time where you combine those? Because I look at the length of the schedule right now, and I think to myself, my goodness, it's not as hard for the drivers as it is for the team guys. And sometimes I feel like when you talk about the logistics of what we have to do to get from Michigan to Mexico City, you think about all those things, and it's hard, right? But when I look at the All-Star race and the Clash, they're very similar. Do you ever think about combining those types of races to open up another weekend?
Yeah, we've talked about it. I think the Clash in particular, being 2 weeks before the Daytona 500, makes a lot of sense on many levels. It's an exhibition race. I think we've always said to ourselves, and we've heard from our fans, that we want our first points race to be at Daytona. We want it to be our biggest event of the year. So kind of keeping that in mind, if you have any of these exhibition races like the Clash, I think that is a huge opportunity for us to promote the Daytona 500. And then to your point, I mean, the All-Star race, I think, has take on so many different evolutions over the past few years, right? We were at Charlotte. Eventually, we went to Bristol, went to Texas. Now we're at North Wilkesboro. So it's something that we also talk about with Speedway Motorsports is what does the future evolution of the All-Star race look like? I think there's a theory around the All-Star race that every weekend is an All-Star race. Right. We have our biggest names and our biggest drivers on all of these races. It's a different format, and it's a format similar to the Clash. So, we've talked about all sorts of different concepts of, do you continue to have the exhibition race? Do you have it look at, like something different? We still got to work on what that's going to be, but I do think it's an opportunity we could look at with SM.
When you look at the playoff schedule, we see New Hampshire in there, we see St. Louis in there this year. What is that mix? Is the goal to keep mixing those playoff races up so it doesn't become like it was, say, 5 years ago, where we had kind of the same mix of racetracks every year. Is the goal to keep mixing that up so that you have the different types of tracks, or what's the thought process when you look at those 10 races? Because
Sure.
obviously they're important, and you don't want to lean towards a guy that's super good on 1.5 mile racetracks. And now the balance is much better between how many of each style of racetrack are in there.
Yeah, I think it's been a little bit of our thought process. If you think about when we made a lot of those changes to the playoff schedule in 2020, we kind of set that schedule, and then we didn't make a ton of changes to it. Maybe one event here or there would move up or down. We weren't really adding many new venues. We weren't moving venues out. This year we'll see Atlanta and Watkins Glen in the playoffs, which I think is going to add probably a new dynamic to that first round.
First race this year.
Out of the box.
Out of the box.
Yeah. So that's going to be interesting. And then next year, we'll have St. Louis, we'll have New Hampshire. And then I think another variable is going to be Talladega going to the round of 8 as well. So, as you think about just playoffs in general, I think our thought process is to still leave a lot of the things that our fans love, like those cutoff races and like a lot of the events, Bristol Night Race as an example, in the playoff schedule. But if there's opportunities for us to introduce a little bit of novelty and add some unpredictability to it, I think that's something that we're looking at as well.
Much better sitting on this side of the fence when
it is.
You have that unpredictability that shows up on the schedule.
When you're in the driver's shoes and you know exactly what 10 events.
You want it the same.
Yeah, exactly. You want it all the same. So.
I'm going to back up just a little bit here. You talk about that novelty and you look at Bowman Gray. You guys made a big move from a NASCAR standpoint to go take over Bowman Gray and the lease that they have there. You make the Clash go to Bowman Gray. Obviously it's in February, so who knows what the weather will be like in February. Tell me the thought process behind taking over Bowman Gray, not only what that means for the Clash coming there. Was that, a necessary part to take it over before the Clash would come there? Or is there more to it with the grassroots sides of things to make sure that is healthy? Because Bowman Gray is somewhat of a novelty week in and week out with all the drama and the racing and everything that happens, but it's full of people every single week. And it's not like going to the Clash in California this year at the Coliseum. Now we're going to a place that's very well educated on the history of our sport, the things that happen. So just explain the whole Bowman Gray piece of the puzzle from all of those aspects.
Yeah, it's going to be new. It's going to be different. It's going to be exciting for sure. And to be on Big Fox on February 2nd, like we talked about, in promoting our season in the 500, it's going to be massive. So I'm really excited about it. I was there when we announced it a couple weeks ago, and the energy in that place every Saturday night. It doesn't matter if you show up in the middle of May or the middle of August or whatever it might be. The energy in that place is palatable. It's incredible, and the fans bring it every single week. And people talk about what makes Bowman Gray so special, and it is on-track product. It is the infrastructure and the history just that you feel inside that stadium, but it's also the people. It's the fans that come every single week. And I was telling this story when I went up there for the first time for one of our K&N races.
Did you race?
I raced,
okay.
Yeah. I raced 2 or 3 times. First year I finished third. The second year we went side by side across the finish line in the grass, like for 10th or something. Last year we ended up, I don't know how, winning the race, probably by a lot of luck. But what was so cool about it is that first year that we went, I sat up and, outside of turn 2, wasn't the best seat in the house. And it was 9:30 in the morning, and there was a family of 4 that sat behind me. And they were almost like looking over my shoulder half the time. And I asked them, I'm like, can I help you? Am I in your way? Am I blocking your view? And they said, no, our family's been sitting here for 25 years, and we're just waiting for you to stand up so we can sit right where you're sitting. So I said, I'm so sorry, but get out of your way. But no, it's a special part of it, and the fans bring so much energy, and I think for us, it's an opportunity for us to give back to a lot of those fans, an opportunity to speak to our history and our roots, but then also an opportunity to put a spotlight on weekly short track racing. When you think about weekly racing for us, that's our longest sanctioned NASCAR facility that we have since 1949. We had cup racing there for a number of years. But every year since, we've had some form of weekly or modified or street stock or whatever it might be there. And, I think that's going to be another opportunity as we think about kind of that week leading into it, is really put a big spotlight on weekly racing.
Do you see any other series racing with the Cup Series, or is it just going to be a Cup only event? I know the facility's tight as far as
It
parking and
is.
things like that.
Yeah, so that was the first thing that came up, is the garage footprint. It's a big parking lot,
Yeah.
and it's tight. So I think anything that you do would probably have to be a 1-day show. Right now, our focus is Cup, but I wouldn't be surprised if we added some more stuff on.
Is there
Friday,
anything
Saturday.
that you have to do to the facility to kind of change from what it is? I know the wall's kind of weird how it kind of goes around the grandstand.
Yeah.
You've driven there, I haven't, so you have to tell me if it's strange. But what do you have to do to the facility, if anything?
So I think a lot of it, especially up in the grandstands and kind of hospitality areas, is very minor. Not a ton of things. The pavement itself is actually in really good condition.
It's new.
It's new.
Yeah.
It's recently resurfaced. I know we talk about drainage, but there's great drains inside of the track. So the track itself is in good condition. To your point, the guardrail is something that we've looked at quite a bit, and trying to assess kind of what that outside barrier will look like. What we've talked a lot about is whatever facility improvements we need to make for a Cup Series to make sure that, for the vehicles that we're putting on track, that everything is safe and up to par. We also want to keep a lot of what makes Bowman Gray, Bowman Gray.
Yeah.
I have a picture on my phone of the guardrail coming off of turn 4, and it looks like a snake, coming back and forth.
It's been hit for 50 years.
It's been hit for so many years, and it's leaning back. And, obviously that brings with it some challenges, but at the same time, when we make any of these improvements, we also want to make sure we protect a lot of the integrity. Yeah. So the way that it's painted, that kind of cutout that it has, a lot of those things we've all been kind of measuring and trying to take this as kind of a timestamp for us, so that when we come back, certainly for next year's event, but then for all of the weekly races as well, that it's as close to what it is today as it can be.
So you're going to Bowman Gray next year. We've been to the Coliseum the last 3 years. Do you ever see some sort of stadium series, or you have the opportunity to move that race around to really you could move it to any stadium that you wanted to, for the most part, with what you did at the Coliseum. Is there a vision to do anything like that, like you did in the Coliseum again, or is it just kind of see what pops up?
Potentially, we've explored it, and I'd say for the Coliseum and for Chicago, both of them, one of the biggest strategic rationales we had for it was a proof of concept, right? If you can race in a Coliseum and prove out that you can build a quarter-mile racetrack inside of the stadium, then that opens a door to all the football stadiums
everywhere
around the world. And if you can run on the streets, then that gives you the ability to literally run anywhere that has a street on it.
Yeah.
So, it's something that we've talked a lot about is, do you potentially turn it into a stadium series? Do you take it to other markets? I think the biggest opportunity for us, frankly, is more so abroad. There aren't a ton of stadiums that you can actually build a quarter-mile racetrack inside of it in the United States, but there are a ton outside of it, especially as you start to talk about Olympic venues and soccer stadiums and all of those sorts. So we have a deck that has hundreds of stadiums and which ones you can and can't do. I think a lot of it for us is, like we did the Coliseum in Chicago and others, it's got to make sense for the industry. It's got to strategically make sense. It's got to be the right market at the right time. And, something that we'll keep on the burner for sure.
You mentioned Chicago. So when we did that on iRacing, I was like, man, what a mess this is going to be. I don't think we really had any idea that it would actually ever happen. And then it did happen. And I was really skeptical. Walked out of the hotel, walked across the street, walked into what would be the last corner of the racetrack, and looked down the front straightaway. And I was like, my goodness, this is really neat. And we walked all the way around the racetrack and back over into the garage. And I know the first year was rain. I know we had some rain the second year. But could you have imagined that it went like it did? Because I couldn't. I would have had no idea. And I think that the one difference for me when we do some of those things, you walk into the city and you don't really know if everybody knows what's going on. When you walked into the city of Chicago around that racetrack, for sure, everybody there knew what was going on. And for me, it was a spectacular experience that I would have never have expected. And I think now when I hear you talk about stadium series and things like that, I think that opens up, you could go to any major city that you want to, because that is now that's a real event that has been embraced by the city. I think Julie's done a great job in running the event with what you guys have done and the activation of all that. But has that exceeded your expectations, I guess is the question.
It has, for sure. And to your point, Julie Geezy and the team in Chicago have done a phenomenal job. This was a wild, crazy concept that we began talking about in the fall of 2019. And it was another 2 years later that it started to pick up a little bit of steam when we had the iRacing Invitational event in June. Went up there, we sat down with the mayor and a number of folks at the time, and it still seemed a little bit like a pipe dream at that point. And it was also at that point that, we started to put our heads together with the sports commission to say, all right, we've had this virtual event. Now, how do we actually turn this into a reality? And it was another 2 years of a lot of planning. And, I think in retrospect, I wish we would have had 3 or 4 years for the amount of planning and work that had needed to be done for that. But, for an event like that to be able to pull it off, and, if you think about the kind of evolution of our schedule over the past few years, we've gone to new markets and new tracks like, Nashville and Austin, Texas, where you have these permanent built racetracks essentially. And you have people that are promoting the events, to the Coliseum, where you have a permanent built facility, but you don't have the racetrack to build the track. You have to operate it. To Chicago, where it's almost a complete other end of the spectrum, where in a way you're kind of operating it as any other brick and mortar facility. You have to market it, you have to promote it, you have all the comms. But then the whole new element about it is exactly what you talked about. It's the walls, it's the fencing, it's the grandstands, suites, hospitality areas. To be able to do all of that with a number of different partners and vendors, and then do it within a specific time frame. I mean, we had about 3 weeks of load in and then a week and a half to 2 weeks of load out from the time that, those first suites and walls start to go in to the time of the event. And then obviously tearing down was a whole new variable for our team. So, thankfully we have a lot of incredibly smart people and a lot of great consultants and partners through it. But to be able to pull off that event, obviously operationally was a massive lift, but then just to have kind of, the brand relevance in somewhere like downtown Chicago, a massive market for us, a massive media market, a ton of avid fans that came out, a lot of people that had never been to a NASCAR race before attended that event. And then on top of that, to be able to get SBJ's event of the year for
pretty
that
cool.
event last year was icing on the cake for us.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so now let's just be spectacle. Let's just be wild and crazy. What's the hole in the NASCAR market that you say, okay, I would take the street course here if I had to just fill the hole, to say, what do we got to do to get there?
Yeah, I would say there's probably a few things. I mean, one is obviously Southern California. We've had the Clash share for the past few years. We've had Fontana for a number of years. We're not going to have a Southern California race on the schedule in 2025. That's a massive opportunity because it's a massive market. Massive market for our partners, massive market for number of people, massive market for a number of fans. So we need to find a way to have a presence in Southern California somehow. So I would say that one. We've talked about the Pacific Northwest a lot. We've had the Xfinity Series at Portland for the past 2 or 3 years. I think that's another market we'd eventually like to be in.
Yeah.
And then I would just say the Northeast in general, not any particular area, whether that's New York or Philadelphia or wherever it might be. But if you look at the amount of racing that we had 4 or 5 years ago in the Northeast relative to where we're at today, we have a lot less inventory. I think the good news is fans are showing up. You look at Dover, you look at Pocono, these places are packed. Even New Hampshire looks really good. So, I think that's another market, just as we think about continuing to expand, that we'd love to have a presence in the Northeast.
Well, I mean, we did have a great LA street race. I know that the kids in today's world like to tell me that I raced in a different century, but I did run the LA street race in the Southwest Tour cars way back in the late 90s. I think we ran there for 2 or 3 years, and it wasn't far from the front step of of the Coliseum.
Yeah, I think we pulled up some videos of that when we started on the Coliseum
Really?
project. Yeah, because we were talking about, do we do it inside of it or do we have a race outside of it? And then we pulled up the video of
Yeah.
some of those races. I didn't realize you were in it.
Oh,
but,
yeah. Yeah.
it was cool. It was an amazing backdrop.
It was,
Yeah.
yeah. And I look back at some of those pictures, and you can actually see the Coliseum in the background. When we go into next year, we have obviously a lot of new TV partners. We have things that are mixed up and changed. What's the dynamic? I've always been curious about this, especially since sitting on this side of the world. What's the dynamic working with the TV partners when they say, well, I want the Daytona 500 and I want Chicago? What was that like working through that with new partners? Again, I know TNT has been here before, but you have Amazon, you have TNT, and then you have Fox and NBC that had already been there. What's that like, trying to balance where everybody wants to be and the way that some of this worked out with the schedule?
Yeah, it's a balance of a handful of different stakeholders, right? You have the fans, you have the broadcast partners, the teams, the drivers, all of the different people that are involved, our OE partners. So it's a matter of trying to find a way to balance all of that out. At the end of the day, it's not going to be perfect for anyone, but if we can find a common ground for a lot of those stakeholders, then we feel like we've created a good schedule. And I think the helpful part about it is, we're able to announce our new broadcast partners for the 25 season between Cup and Xfinity, and then obviously the Truck Series. And we already had at least an idea of the path that we're heading down. We knew that Fox was to take the first kind of 14 races, Amazon with 5, TNT with 5, and then NBC for the last 4 of the regular season, and then the championship races. And then really for us, it was a matter of just kind of, moving the dominoes around the board. We knew which ones our broadcast partners prioritize. We knew which ones were important to teams. Weather obviously has a huge impact, especially you think about February, March, and October, and November. And then we just started to kind of lay out the schedule. And I would say, we've stopped going through numbers of drafts. We just have a live schedule now because it changes so much. But it's neat to see the evolution of where you start in the schedule, you get feedback from partners, and then where it ends up. And I would say, probably 60 to 70% of it is spot on when we start. And then there's another, the rest of it that will just continue to change and evolve as we get more.
Are you a whiteboard guy, or do you have it on your computer?
So someone asked me about this. I used to write on my glass in my office. But then I realized that everyone can see that. And then there's cleaning crews that come in every night and everything, that if someone takes a picture of it, that may not be helpful for us. So we keep it all on the computers now. Yeah.
I have a whiteboard that I can flip over in my office. That way, when I'm writing stuff down about money, I flip it over so my wife can't see it in the office.
Nice.
That way.
That's smart.
Yeah, that way she doesn't know. I guess the last piece that, and then I want to talk about you, is the Banquet moving to Charlotte. I think from an industry standpoint, we've been to New York and Vegas and Nashville, and I think that's a great move, just because of the teams traveling all the time and giving them another weekend where they can just travel down to Charlotte and go back home that night is probably a welcome change, I would assume.
Yeah, I think so. At least from what I've heard so far, it's been welcome. And to your point, we've had the Banquet at a number of places. Going back to Charlotte, it's home for a lot of people. Yeah. It's home for the race teams. So I think it's gonna be special. And with everyone traveling week after week, to be able to do it 2 weeks after Phoenix, and just kind of put an exclamation point on the season in Charlotte and everyone's hometown, and still make it feel special.
Yeah.
You've been our champion before. Do you know those small touches that really do make it special? Sometimes it's the market, but I'd say a lot more of it is the dinners and the ceremonies and the entertainment and all of the other things that come around that week. So we want to continue to elevate that and then do it in our backyard.
I want to talk about you now. You've been around this sport your whole life. Just kind of give us a brief background of really how you got involved into the position, how you evolved into the position that you're in now. And just your path to that I know it's been quite a journey, but you've raced, you've driven, you work on the business side. So you've kind of had your team owner, you've kind of had all these different aspects of the sport. So just explain to me how you got here and just your background of how you achieved the position that you're in now with everything that you've done.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure it out.
Well, I think it's important for people to know that, I think
Yeah.
a lot of these executives in today's world, and even in NASCAR, don't have a huge racing background, but you've been around this sport from the day that you were born, and you've seen a lot of things come and go. You've seen a lot of people, you've heard a lot of things. So I think it's important for people to understand that you're not just showing up, throwing darts at this. You've seen a lot of it.
Yeah. Literally and figuratively, I've had the opportunity to grow up around the sport. My mom, Lisa Kennedy, she's been involved in what was the former International Speedway Corporation, which owned a number of the different racetracks that we go to. So I had the opportunity to grow up with her and then see the rest of my family on kind of the other side of the page, on the NASCAR side of the business, and how that all worked together and how the tracks and NASCAR and the other partners all collaborated together. So, I remember growing up as a kid, I'd get out of school on Friday at 2 or 3 in the afternoon and go straight to the airport and fly to whichever race was going to happen that weekend. And those were my memories growing up as a kid. And then, eventually once I got into my teens, I played basketball for a number of years. I played a couple sports. I was terrible at every one of them. And it was a friend of ours that he signed me up for a go-kart lesson down at Little New Smyrna Speedway. And I knew that I liked go-karting. I didn't know much about actually racing go-karts. And I went there and I had the time of my life. And I remember my dad brought me back. It was, maybe 2 months later, my first quarter midget, and it was a used quarter midget. It was beat up, and we spray painted that thing, and we took it out to the track every Tuesday after school. We'd go and practice, and then every Friday we would go out and race. And it was a really cool family moment for us because, we had grown up around the business side of the sport. We had no idea what we were doing on the competition side of the sport. I mean, springs and sway bars and all this stuff that was completely foreign language to us. And, I think to be able to grow up on that side, was really cool. But then to get involved in the driving side was a whole new element. So I did that for a number of years, eventually went on and competed in a number of series, Canada and East. I made it to the Craftsman Truck Series, the Xfinity Series for my final year. And then I guess it was about 6 years ago, I made that transition. The last race I had was November of 2017. I was racing for RCR at Homestead. And I finished that race, and I had some options to continue racing in 2018. And, I really took those next 2 or 3 months and did a lot of just self-reflection. I had accomplished a lot of things, I think, more than I think I would have expected in my racing career. I felt like I was finally hitting my stride as a driver where I was starting to get more comfortable kind of in the vehicles and a lot of these tracks we were going to. But also kind of looked at myself in the mirror. I realized I'm 25 years old. I'm immensely passionate about this sport. I'm immensely passionate about continuing to grow the sport to the next generation. And I feel like it could have somewhat of a positive impact on it. And I had a number of conversations with Steve Phelps and Steve O'Donnell and a handful of folks at NASCAR. And I think it was the middle of January in 2018. I made a call to I think it was Steve O'Donnell, and I told him, "Hey, I'm in for this thing. And I'm not looking back." And I remember as soon as those words came out of my mouth, because usually when I say something, I do a pretty good job of living up to it. As soon as I said those words, I'm like, "Oh boy, here we go! I can't back out now." And then I started about a week and a half later and started on the truck side. So, spent 11 years racing. It was a little bit of an easier transition starting in the competition world and just kind of knowing a lot of the people involved because I was at the track every week. So I started in the truck series, eventually got more involved in international expansion and development, working with Chad Siegler and our group there. And then after that, and kind of tangentially to it, Steve and I were working on the 2020 schedule. This was in 2019, I guess. Really started to pick that up. And then he challenged me. He's like, you've been helpful on this. I'd like for you to put a team together to start to think about what the 2021 schedule looks like. and we need to find new markets and new venues that we're going to. So put together a team around that, started to focus on that for about a year and a half. Kind of in parallel to that, I was working with the strategy team, still international a little bit. And then I would say more recently, over the past year or so, it's really been kind of scheduling focus. I've been more involved with the NASCAR kind of regional side, so NASCAR Weekly and NASCAR Modifieds. And then much more recently, I've been working with Chip Weil on all of our racetracks, and then Kerry Gritton, who heads up our admissions as well. And I think as I take a step back on all of this in my journey, I I think it's also a bit ironic that I grew up in the family business, but I grew up around my mom, who was, largely responsible for the tracks. And now I'm working directly with the tracks, and it's something that I'm responsible for. So I think it's an amazing opportunity, and I think it's neat how it's kind of come full circle, and it's also helpful to have people like Lisa and John Saunders and other people that helped build the track side of the business up to where it's at today, that I can still reach out and have lunch or give a phone call to. Right. And get feedback on.
It's good to have that.
There's a lot of wisdom and knowledge
right.
there for sure.
When you look back at the driving side, what was your favorite vehicle that you've ever driven?
Oh gosh, I like the Xfinity cars a lot, and I think a big part of it is, I love just the way that those vehicles race. You could run the bottom, you run the middle, you run the top. It really felt like it was. And this was me going from a truck for 3 years to an Xfinity car. I felt like I could create more speed with that vehicle than I necessarily could a truck. The truck took a lot of learning to get used to, just with all the downforce and side force that it had. And then I would say of all the vehicles, I thought the K&N or the ARCA East cars were just a blast. Bias ply tires, you're slipping and sliding around all the time. I learned a ton about tire management. You've raced bias ply tires at Pensacola and Greenville Pickens Speedway. It teaches you that if you go really hard for 15 or 20 laps and you burn your stuff up, you're toast. So I really enjoyed that. And then super late model race. I would say of all of them, probably the ARCA East cars were my favorite.
When you look back at, and I think the wreck that you had at Kentucky, was that a topic of conversation in the household?
It was bad.
It was bad.
It was really bad.
We were sitting there thinking to ourselves, Ben, maybe it's time to think about the side that you're on now. Was that a topic of conversation at that time?
It always was. Yeah. I think anytime I got in a wreck or an incident,
that one tore the catch fence down.
It did. It tore the catch fence down, and thankfully I was in one piece afterwards, and the vehicle did its job. But it was always a topic after I got out a lot of those races, and I think, and I respect this of my parents, they always wanted me to do what I was passionate about, whether that was being on the business side, whether that was being a driver, whether that was being whatever it might be in the world. And I appreciated that about them. And, they said, if you want to continue to race, we're going to be supportive of you. And, we're going to continue to lean in and help you wherever you can, and, finding partners or finding your next ride or whatever it might be. But, it also was a topic of conversation. I think the great part about it is, the evolution of safety of these vehicles and these cars are safer than they've ever been before. And I was watching a YouTube video the other day, and you saw all these onboard wrecks and visor cams, and a lot of just non-fans commenting about like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they walked away from it. And I think that is a testament to the R&D center, but a testament to the entire industry for getting to where it's at today. I've had some ugly wrecks, but thankfully, and knock on wood, every one of them I've been able to walk away unscathed.
As I tell my son, if you're going to race, you're going to wreck. So
yes,
you can't leave without answering the same question that everybody else has. So what was your first car? Where is it?
So my first car, it was a Dodge Neon.
Dodge Neon.
It was 96 Dodge Neon that I had, and I wanted a car that I could work on and kind of make a kit car. So we painted it black, put seat covers on it, and did all sorts of stuff. I eventually sold it to my friend. And then I would say my more first real car is I still have it today is a 2000 Ford Mustang GT. And I always wanted stick shift. I always wanted, I don't know why I was like really craving having like specifically a 2000 Ford Mustang. I thought they were the coolest cars and they had so many aftermarket parts you could put on them. Yeah. And same thing, painted it flat black, put a new hood on it, new front bumper, back bumper, new, put a wing on it. It's got like scissor doors on it and all sorts of. We just went crazy with it because we were teenagers, and rebuilt the motor. It was the most fun that we had growing up, being able to work on cars like that, and it's still sitting in my garage today.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for taking the time today. We're excited about the schedule. Can't wait to show up at the Clash and get started.
Can't wait for it. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
We want to thank Ben for taking the time to come in studio today. It was a great conversation. Hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I do. We want to encourage you to follow and subscribe everywhere that you can, just so we can hear Mamba talk a little bit of junk in all of those conversations. So we hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week.